drive the fly. Anyway, we get up there, drive up there, drive back,
Don't try to argue with that thing. It'll beat you.
900 miles.
I'm just proud mine pull something up.
Highway 90 and 1087 in Mossy on Saturday night after driving 900 something miles.
It worked a little faster last time. Now, I don't know how it's going to go this time, but it was.
See us right here?
You guys are gonna make it home. My truck just started.
Really?
Yeah.
At least you were close.
I'm like, what the heck? They ain't had a minute's trouble out of it. None at all.
And that's on
I
that
figured you probably would.
Yes.
I need to.
I left on home. Huh?
fairly new, isn't it?
15.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, fairly new.
Get home and get it up to a dealer. I said, Triangle Chevrolet don't like me much anymore. They're defeating me. So,
They don't like you? You can complaining about it?
well, they fixed it before. They had to replace a couple of lifters and oil pump. It's the same thing. And anyway, I ended up taking over Alan Turner's up in Crestwood.
How's y'all recruiting
What I
going?
found is, I mean, it's a problem with the 2000,
Okay, they ended up at 5.
with that 5 point, with that, where it goes from a
I'm number 5 in this.
Yeah, but we finished 4th in the
cylinder, not lifters aren't hitting the hole.
But if you were the top 10,
Basically, they have their own.
you got a
rebuilt
coach.
motor.
Yeah.
They won't replace it.
Of course, you did beat Alabama. I wasn't going to say nothing about that, but I mean,
Y'all got,
But
I'm going to tell you.
anyway, after 900 miles, it's got to be good.
As on coaches, college ball,
Anyway,
Hey, at least you were close to home.
all works.
You left on home?
oh yeah, I made it home. Only 2 miles from the house.
Because they don't, Malzahn pulls a lot of,
Yeah, going over to the
high school stuff. That's right. I didn't see a moment out of it.
eastern side and the western side. It's like, yeah,
Coach is the perfect person to pull it on, because he's so dang.
He'll never imagine. I was at a wedding when that game kicked off.
Ma'am.
Until the last one in.
They're out.
Never been so mad.
That's we didn't have, you gotta be lucky.
They quit using it in 2015 and went to a different design, so they don't
How
stop.
are you?
Y'all had Tua, if y'all had Tua, y'all would want, you'd have been
So I looked at the Toyotas. I like them.
Had just enough to get there.
They do get horrible gas mileage, but they don't break.
Yeah.
That's because they've probably been building that same motor for 30 years now. Once they get something they like, they don't change it.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't break either.
Yeah.
That's the problem with the Chevrolet and even all American-made stuff is they're constantly changing stuff. And every time they do, they got to work the bugs out.
Okay, we're ready to go.
All right, Mr. Chair.
Aaron, are you ready? All right, if you would, please stand and join us. We have an invocation and say the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lord, we thank you for today. We thank you for another opportunity to be here, Lord, to serve you and to serve the citizens of Walton County. Pray that you just be with this board and everybody who's come here today, Lord, to present and to speak, that you just let us get things done in a civil manner, Lord, make decisions that are best for Walton County and just enjoy ourselves while we're doing it, Lord, but take the task at hand as seriously as it is. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Before we get going, just a reminder, if you haven't already done so, please either silence or turn off your cell phones so we can minimize distractions. And also, I don't think we'll need it looking at the agenda, but in case we do get to 9 p.m., we will have a 9 p.m. time certain end to the meeting, so any items that have not been completed by then will be moved to the next meeting. First item on the agenda is approval of minutes. Commissioners,
Motion approved.
we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Mr. Carpenter?
Good evening, Commissioners. Matt Carpenter for the Planning Department, CARPENTER. We have 5 development proposals for you tonight, 2 legislative and 3 are quasi-judicial. Look forward to hearing all of them tonight before 9 o'clock. We have no request for continuances on tonight's agenda. First item would be the East End 5 million gallon tank and booster pump station small-scale amendment. This is a request submitted by Ryan Douglas on behalf of Florida Community Services Corporation, doing business as Regional Utilities. They're requesting approval for a future land use change from Village Center and a zoning district of Village Center to a future land use of public facilities and institutional, and a zoning district of public facilities and institutional on approximately 4 acres. Project's located on the south side of US 98, approximately 1 mile from the 1 mile west of the intersection of Watersound Parkway and US Highway 98, and it's identified by the parcel number in your package. Be happy to answer any questions you might have from staff. The applicant is here to present their case.
Okay. Anybody have any questions from staff at this point?
I'd like to introduce the staff report into the record.
Definitely.
Thank you.
The applicant here.
Thank you for having us. Ryan Douglas with Regional Utilities. I have Dylan Laird here with me as well. As Mac mentioned, we're looking at installing, planning to install a future water tank on the east end of our system. As you know, most of the development within our system, or the great majority of the density, is happening over there. So that is the purpose of this project. Be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Pretty simple, right?
It is very simple, straightforward. It is a water tank.
Anybody have any questions for the applicant?
This is one of those raised tanks?
It is a ground, that's a good question. It is a ground concrete storage tank. It's very similar to the ones at 331, across from the annex.
Okay.
A little bit larger in diameter, but the same concept.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much. Is there anybody who wishes to address this item from the public? Seeing none, we'll close public comments. Commissioners?
Approve. Second.
Motion. Second. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Y'all got out here too easy.
It's always important to make sure things flow downhill in the right direction.
There you go.
Next item is item number 3 on our agenda, the Burnt Pine Commerce Park Small Scale Amendment Developer Agreement. This board has already heard the small scale amendment, and I believe had a unanimous approval recommendation to the board. When it reached the Board of County Commissioners, there was some discussion about the allowable uses in the land use category that were being proposed compared to the support that the developer was providing for the land use change. The BCC asked the developer to come back with a developer agreement that would more specifically identify what particular aspects of the entitlements under that land use category they were choosing to use. And it has the effect of limiting what can be done under the small scale amendment that y'all recommended approval on. I'm going to ask Bob Baronti just to briefly describe the agreement.
Okay.
Good evening. Bob Baronti, B-A-R-O-N-T-I. This development agreement follows along the exact acreage of the small scale amendment, 9.8 acres. It will be proposed to have a 10-year length. The start will be from the date of the approval of the developer's agreement. It matches the zone request. The current future land use is conservation residential. The zoning is conservation residential 2-to-1. The request is to future land use commercial, and the zoning to general commercial. It's being proposed to have multifamily residential use, a max of 17 units per acre, with a total of 166 total units, with 20% of that total being being dedicated that are designed for workforce housing. The max height is 50 feet. The commercial FAR will meet the general commercial and also the ISR of the FAR of 1% and the FAR of 1 and the ISR of 85%. All commercial development will be for the use of the residence, office, swimming pool, such like that. There will be nothing advertised. A transit stop will be provided to help with the workforce housing. These are kind of the major points. I will turn it over to the applicant to go over a little bit more. Do you have any questions for me?
Anybody? I don't right now, Bob.
Could I get this into?
Absolutely, it's
record, please?
accepted.
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. Curtis Smith with Nautilus Civil Engineers. We're trying to see if we can get this PowerPoint up, but it's having some issues there. But really, most everything we're going to talk about, we've already covered. Bob's covered. As you recall, this commission did vote to approve this project on October the 10th. It was moved to the November the 12th BCC meeting. I believe some of you were at that BCC meeting that I saw and heard. We had quite a bit more presentation at that meeting on traffic. We did an extensive traffic analysis on Goldsby Road and presented that information. We also discussed the developer's intent to provide further vehicle and pedestrian improvements on Goldsby Road using the $131,000 of our estimated proportionate fair share fees that we think this project will generate based on 166 apartments, which is the maximum that's permitted. We also made mention of the Public Works' plan for the East Lamb Connector roadway. I don't know if we talked about that. Next slide, since you've got it going here. Not sure we talked about that in the last meeting. Not working. So I've got some graphics if it comes up for the East Lamb Connector roadway. I'll see. But basically, there's a connector roadway on the north that takes it over to West Hewitt Road down to Walmart. Also, you've got the Topsail West PUD that has connector roadways all the way through to 30A. So in the future, we will have a substantial amount of more connectivity for this area. In addition to that, this project that we've included in the agreement to actually improve the intersection at Goldsby and 98.
What are you gonna do at 98 and Goldsby?
Right now, there's a single outbound lane. What the plan is currently is to split that into a right turn and a left turn lane. Like I said, we did a very extensive analysis. We actually set up cameras and did traffic counts on the traffic coming in and out of Goldsby. I've got some good information on that. We will ultimately do a traffic signal warrant analysis on that when the time comes for the engineering design. So the BCC voted to table the project and asked us to come back with a developer agreement to limit the development to the attainable workforce apartment housing. So that was kind of the final determination at that meeting. So today we brought forth this agreement. Planning Director Matt Carpenter and the County Attorney Sidney Noyes have both been coordinating with us on that. We've incorporated their comments in the draft that you have. Hopefully you've got a copy of that draft. It's an 8-page agreement. Most of it is kind of the required boilerplate language by the Florida statute. But we had some key points that I wanted to point out, and I think Bob touched on most of these. It's that we've established that there's a maximum density of 17 units an acre. That's what general commercial allows under a conditional use, or 166 units on this particular property. There are no commercial building spaces for lease or sale on the property. That's part of the agreement. The only permitted commercial uses will be the management office, clubhouse, or other amenities serving the apartment development. Developer will provide a minimum of 20% of the housing units for workforce housing as defined in the Land Development Code. That's just a restatement of what's in the code. And I will note that this is not affordable housing as defined by more bureaucratic standards to go through those processes. This is workforce housing. The agreement also specifies that multimodal transportation improvements will be completed as part of this project. A public transit stop will be dedicated up on Goldsby Road. We'll cite that in there. And when we have public transportation available in South Walton, they'll have a stop there. The intersection of Goldsby at Highway 98 is to be improved with what we just talked about by splitting the outbound lane to dedicated right and left turn lane. And an asphalt multi-use path is to be constructed from the project site southward along Goldsby to the intersection of Goldsby and 98. Now, in preparing this presentation, it occurred to me while I was looking at it that we have something defined in the agreement currently that states that it'll be on the west side of Goldsby. We want to strike that out, and the commission may wish to address that in a motion tonight. The reason for that is I've actually got some concern about the west side on the old tops of warehouses that are there. They have kind of a non-conforming parking issue out there that could make a path a little bit dangerous on the west side, so we may end up moving it to the east side. So I just want to strike the side language out, and we'll do that before the next.
That's a safety concern because of what's already there.
Correct, yes. So we're leaving the language in, just striking the west side out so it can be either or. And finally, the agreement specifies that any cost of these transportation improvements, the multimodal, including both the multi-use path and the turn lanes, will be credited to the developer to offset any proportional fair share or mobility fees if we get into the mobility fees by the time we get this project through. So those are the highlights of the agreement, and we'll welcome any further recommendations this commission may have to modifications or deletions or additions. Also, if the commission wishes to ask any further questions on the technical aspect of it, I'd be happy to answer any of those I can.
Commissioners, anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I got one. Yeah. How do you determine the workforce housing side of it? I know what it is for affordable housing, but workforce housing, how are they going to determine that?
We've actually been in contact. We sat down and had a meeting about a month and a half ago with an apartment developer that's doing some apartments in Freeport. And he's trying to get one in South Walton. John's also had some contact with some other apartment developers to determine what we can realistically do here. Impact fees and construction costs, as we all know in South Walton, are very difficult. They've came up with some kind of break-even numbers that they estimate it's going to be around $1,000 a month for rent will be a break-even point. So they're kind of determining that. Now, the Land Development Code keeps workforce housing a little bit more general for affordable to area workers. So basically, the planning director, I would think would have some input on interpreting that specific part of the code as to what is affordable to area workers.
Mack, what is your opinion on that?
The definition of workforce housing is 140% of median or less at initial occupancy. And I believe they can go up to 20% of that and still be able to renew their lease. We would also concur in striking the locational requirement for the multi-use path as shown in the, for the reasons the applicant suggested.
All right.
I got a question. When you say 20% is workforce housing, are those units necessarily less size or just, it's all the same, you just designate 20%?
Rent controlled.
Yeah, just rent control, okay.
Anybody else have any questions? All right, we'll open it up for public comments. I have one person sign up to speak, Michelle Doggett.
speaks on this project, if that's okay.
Oh,
DSAP
I'm on the
1.
wrong thing here. I apologize. I'm on the wrong project. Lee didn't keep me straight. All right. Anybody else from the public wish to address this item?
Got to sign up. Can I say a word?
Absolutely, you can.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I know John King. We've been friends for a long time, but
Bet against you.
I know John King and I count him as a friend, but I have a comment on this project. I live back in that area and I travel Goldsby every day. And it's getting harder and harder and harder to get off of Goldsby onto Highway 98. Sometimes we sit there for 10, 15, 20 minutes. Lights has to change 4 or 5 times before there's a break in the traffic. It's critical that if this project is approved, and I'm sure it will be, that lane, that right turn lane be put in as soon as possible. It also would help a lot if, for traffic going from the east to the west, if they had a turn lane to come into Goldsby too, it would help smooth the traffic out. And of course, a light eventually down the road would be a good thing, but I just wanted to reiterate from somebody who travels that road every day, it's just getting almost impossible to get out now, and it's even harder to go over to Mack Bayou, which is the only other road to get out, and that's fixing to get busier too. So I just want to say it's real critical to get that turn lane in.
I appreciate it. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
sir. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on this item? Yes, ma'am. I don't know.
My name's Jennifer Dodge, last name D-O-D-G-E. A lot of this you guys already heard before the first time I was here, but I did have a couple of people that asked me to come. I was happy with the removal of the commercial in the deal. I still have issue with the general commercial designation because I couldn't find anywhere else in the county where there was a general commercial designation property that wasn't on a corner or a major highway. The only other one I could find was the other property that Mr. King had rezoned that is vacant now, which is just closer to Highway 98. I really don't think that this kind of zoning fits in with the plan as the map that I look at it.
Ms.
I don't-
Dodge, you understand we're just talking about the developers agreement tonight,
I
right?
understand.
Right.
I understand. I just came here to say what I'm going to say. I really don't expect you to listen because you
No,
didn't
no, no,
listen
no,
last time.
I would
So
appreciate
just-
if you kept it to the item that we're discussing.
Okay.
We're not discussing the land use change, that's already been done.
Okay, well, if you just let me talk, I'll be done.
Well, if you'd address the
Okay.
item that we're talking about, that's what you're here for.
Well, I'm pretty sure this is still an application for a zoning change.
No, ma'am. This
No.
is just to hear the,
Because, yeah, really, because they didn't vote on it at
Ms. Dodge,
BCC.
I'm not gonna argue with you.
Well, then just let me talk.
If
okay.
you want to talk about what we're here to discuss.
Sir.
If you want to talk about the land use change, you can go back to the BCC. They will be hearing that there.
I am going to finish talking, okay? Because it is my right as an American citizen, all right?
Ms. Dodge,
Thank
it's your
you.
right to speak on the
Okay.
item that we're
I
discussing
still think that
tonight.
this is too much density. That's what I think. I don't think this kind of density belongs on this particular road. I don't think this kind of density belongs surrounded by so much conservation residential land. And the plaque behind you says pride, preservation, and conservation, and I don't think this project does any of that. And that is what I have to say. Thank you.
ma'am. Anybody else wish to speak on this item? All right, we'll close public comments. Commissioners, what's your pleasure?
Motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a second. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, these following items are quasi-judicial.
Anyone who anticipates testifying on any of the remaining items, if you would, at this time, stand to be sworn in. If you would raise your hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll provide to this board will be the truth? Thank you. Whenever you come forward, if you would, state your name and state whether or not you've been sworn in. Let me help you.
Ready?
This is Major Development 19-000021. It's the first detailed special area plan that we have in partial implementation of the West Bay Sector Plan. The West Bay Sector Plan was adopted into comprehensive plan a number of years ago, and this really is kind of the second step towards implementation of that sector plan. And as you know, it's a very large development, and in Walton County, there's a portion of the sector plan. The other major portion is in Bay County. This particular request is to begin development. So once this DSAP is approved, the individual development projects, subdivisions, commercial projects under this DSAP will come in as minor development. So this is your only view of this project if it moves forward, because we've already adopted into the Land Development Code that these projects will be made minors after the DSAP approval. So you kind of think of it like a PUD. It's very similar to a PUD, just different nomenclature. So with that being said, they have to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, with the sector plan, which is adopted into the comprehensive plan. They have to be consistent with our land development code to a certain extent, but they can request deviations just like a PUD. And, you know, I just want to say that that's not a bad thing. You know, sometimes deviations are necessary to accomplish a certain type of development or development pattern, and that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. We have been going back and forth with the applicant. Staff has for about 3 months now, 3-4 months, I don't know. And we've come a long way. I think that they've really stepped up and done a lot of the things that we've asked for. And we're really happy with the direction things are going. But there's a couple of things that we just kind of have outstanding. And also there's some deviations that we can go over. And I'll let you decide how you want to handle that.
Well, probably best just to, in my opinion anyway, is go through this thing and let's handle deviations all at one time. That way we can go down that list and understand what we're being asked to forgive.
Staff recommendations, before I get started, I want to say that there's a traffic analysis included in this DSAP that we are not reviewing, or it basically has, we want to make the statement that we're not accepting that analysis in any way, the methodology or anything that's in there, because our land development code requires them to come in for each of those minors with a new traffic analysis. And that may be different assumptions, and we're reserving the right to review those assumptions when they come in at that time. So I just want to make that statement. We have a couple of other recommendations. Some of them are just clean up. If you look on the staff report on page, this is a really big staff report. On page 20. One of our big sort of remaining recommendations at this point is that we're really clear in the DSAP on the right-of-way designations for some of the roads that are being proposed. I think from a public standpoint and from a comprehensive plan standpoint, what we really have to be careful of at this stage is that we protect existing public roads and planned public roads such as US 98 by making sure that there's adequate connection internal to this development. And the comp plan says that. It says that they will do that in this DSAP. So we want to make sure that we meet that comprehensive plan objective by establishing those cross connections as viable roads. We also have to meet a multimodal transportation objective that is also in the comprehensive plan. So we need to have adequate right-of-way to ensure that some future multimodal facilities will be possible. You know, if we have 50-foot right-of-ways, then we're not going to be able to achieve any multimodal goals in the future.
So we have asked for some revision to the map that is in the concept plan now, map B 2.2, which shows the roadway network, so that we're clear what right-of-ways are being established. And I gave you sort of a marked up version of that map today that is kind of what staff would be asking for moving forward. So we want to make sure that the cross-connection road is either designated as a minor arterial or a major collector, so that we have adequate right-of-way there, and that Water Sound Parkway connector, really importantly, is designated with appropriate right-of-way.
Well, Kristen, do we need to handle those specifically as far as for staff to address those right-of-ways?
You can, or we can, accept staff's recommendations for changes, or you may have additional changes that you want to suggest,
What are your recommendations?
And I think at this point, Kristen's just providing her comments.
Okay.
And we'll still have an
Yeah, the applicant can let them come forward, because they may agree, or, we may be able to resolve some of this. The other major comment that we had was to make sure that we identify that parallel facility on 98 as a major collector or minor arterial, and that we make the appropriate connections there on either side. And this preserves capacity on 98, keeps as much of their traffic internal to their development as possible, and that's a critical public concern. So the other things that we, in addition to traffic, that we had recommended in here is that we have better coordination with regional utilities. And I'll just say that, the state statutes set up utilities where they have to go ahead, and when they get close to reaching capacity, they have to start planning for future capacity. What the comp plan asks for, though, is the financial analysis on their part as to, will that be okay over this 15 years of this project? It's not saying that they don't have the capacity. They probably do have the capacity, but the comp plan policies that are existent say, you need to go through that financial analysis. And so we've asked them for that. The other remaining outstanding issue is that there's sort of dueling school projection, and Michelle is here and she can speak to that, but the school board has a different analysis for future needs. The comp plan does say that the sector plan has to provide, the DSAP has to provide school sites if there is a need. So if the school board's saying there is a need, that may be something that has to be resolved in this DSAP. The other comment's just really minor, I think, dealing with environmental, getting that cleared. So with that being said, I can go through the deviations that they're requesting, or maybe the applicant.
Let them present,
won't
and
let
we
them
can do
do
that
it?
at the end.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Neil Strelo. I'm a senior planner with VHB. My address is 501 East Kennedy Boulevard, Tampa, Florida, 33602. Appreciate being with you this evening. And as Kristen had, staff has identified, we've been working, we've been working since April with our pre-application, and then through the LDRs that you had seen in July. Ultimately, since adoption on these materials, working back and forth with staff, and we appreciate their input and guidance. The exhibits that we have in front of you are just blow-up that you have in your documents as well as part of your packet. But it represents the concept plan and the mobility plan, and then subsequently also framework plan as well. All of those are in your exhibits. And really what this is an extension of the successful Water Sound Origins project, moving into additional acreage on the north side of 98 between the intercoastal. The deviations that had been referenced, and we can, as we go through those, are making it consistent with those development standards within the Origins development. It's nothing different than what is already being developed in that project. We have established a set of a street network within the mobility plan and the framework that shows an interconnected grid that reserves rights of way, both on the residential side and, as Kristen had been identifying, on the larger rights of way as well. As those are more defined through your mobility plan, those types of improvements would be defined in the future as you take action. I think by the end of the summer is what you're projecting. We understand that that grid work in this middle, there's a tremendous amount of low quality and high quality wetlands that has yet to be jurisdictionally defined. So once a JD line is established through the future development process, that grid network will get revised and refined. What we're doing is trying to identify avoidance of major wetlands, high quality wetlands in these concepts, and using the low quality wetlands as part of our open space and retention areas and recreation areas as part of the plan. We appreciate the staff finding the materials in consistency with the comp plan and the LDRs, and we would look for your support in the adoption and approval of this application. And we can talk through the deviations, or what would your preference be? There's a series of them, so.
What do y'all want to do?
Are they listed somewhere?
Yeah, they are. They're actually in the application, page 22, it starts, and 23.
Why don't you go ahead and talk through your side of it?
Sure.
And if we have questions of you, we'll ask. And then Kristen can come up and we can follow up before you.
Sure, and I
take
heard
any
that there
action.
was some additional conversation on schools that was going to be needed as well.
Yeah.
So on page 22, Walton County Land Development Code deviations, wetlands protection is identified with a 25 feet landward of the setback protection zone. And there's a existing RGP EMA for this development area.
Hold on just a
I
second.
ain't finding it on page 22. Are you?
No, that's what I was gonna ask you. We're not on
Actually,
page 22.
in
We're in the staff report probably looking. That's how ours
Page
starts
22
out, so
of
you're-
their,
the submittal report.
it's 20, I think it's page 20 of the staff report.
You'll have to, the first page of the document is this, looks like.
If you go from that, the page number 22.
Is it numbered in there?
Yes, sir. Lower right hand.
Takes a little while for these tablets to come up
Oh,
too.
okay. It is a big document. I apologize.
So you were on the mobility plan, is that part of it?
No, sir, it's under the heading Walton County Land Development Code deviations on page 22.
Where'd you find it at?
64 on this, it's 22 on that.
Oh, the PDF, or? Everybody up? So the darkened text are the specific LDR reference, and the explanation behind is the deviation requested. The 25 feet landward of the upland edge is a protection zone by code. There's an RGP EMA agreement with the Army Corps for this area in the DSAP. And what the standard is for a high-quality wetland, that last sentence, a 30-foot minimum, and a 50-foot average, and we just want to be consistent with that.
So y'all are asking for 25?
No, sir, your standard is 25. We just want to be consistent with that last sentence, RGPEMA, which is a 30-foot minimum and a 50-foot average. So that gives some flexibility of in and out along the high-quality wetlands.
So you're saying you're going to provide more than 25?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Along those high qualities, yeah.
Okay.
This is standard to the,
25 to 50?
yes, and 50 on average. And that's along the entire length. So it gives flexibility of movement in and out of that setback, or that protection zone, I should say.
I'm not following the deviation then if you're going to be more than they're asking for.
We just want to be consistent with what the RGPMA requires.
Okay.
And that it may be in some areas more than what your code standard is. Yes, because on the average, you
Oh, I see
can,
what you're saying, yeah.
depending upon, you know, the location and what you'll see is these areas of highlight are high-quality wetlands and low-quality wetlands. And we know that once the jurisdictional lines are set, we're going to try and avoid roadway networks and platting and those impacts where we can. And so giving us that flexibility of the average that's included within the permit already is a good advantage for better design.
There'll be at least 30 feet.
No.
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 From high-quality wetlands, which are these areas. This outer line is low-quality wetlands, and they're, it could be modified and be less than that.
So technically, you could get into 0 at some places.
Yeah.
If for a high quality, it's 30. In low quality areas, it might be. It would be a protection of the line.
But a minimum 30 on high quality. And
Right, and then an average of
Quality.
50.
Okay.
So along the entire length, we would have to do that calculation.
The zoning says 25 feet
The LDRs.
code. Yeah,
And does it make a distinction between low and high?
Okay.
okay, all right.
Building setbacks are set forth in a table that's included, and in order to continue from the Water Sound North DRI and PUD patterns of development, we're looking for a minimum 0-foot side setback with 10 feet between buildings, and a 0 front and rear yard for all uses. And no building would occur within any easements.
Okay.
Landscaping, this is a street tree requirement, and I think that the item is relief from the allowance of a 60-foot maximum between street trees. This is another consistent item with water sound origins. And so we would plan and design for protection of the natural vegetation in lieu of the required additional street trees or the 10-foot wide planting areas. Again, in the next building foundation landscaping, we are looking for relief from that at least 50% of the facade length. It is to eliminate this requirement to allow for creative uses of landscape in areas adjacent to the building, such as bike parking and gathering areas. It will be a well-landscaped project. That standard, we're seeking relief to be consistent with our other developments. The off-street parking requirements chart for attached single-family 4 or more bedrooms, the code requires a minimum of 4 spaces per unit, plus 1 additional space for every additional bedroom over the 4 units. And we are looking for a reduction to provide the on-site parking of 2 spaces per dwelling unit.
Parking is an issue in South Walton, you know that.
I do. This development is similar to Origins. It's permanent residence. It's not predominantly a seasonal project.
That's true, but it's not all retirement. It's all not 55 and older, so that means it's families, and that means there are multiple cars and multiple trips. And 2, my opinion is that 2 per property is not enough. It's not.
Well, we would respectfully request that to be consistent with our other development standards.
Any overflow parking areas anywhere?
I would assume, yeah.
Is this, hi. This is, Bridget.
Come on up. Yeah, they got you blocked there, so.
I'm the voice behind the curtain. My name's Bridget Precise. I'm with the St. Joe Company, Precise. On the, currently, that was part of the reasoning for asking for the additional length between street trees. Right now in Origins, we do have some on-street parking pads that we set up, and so the 60-foot tree spacing will allow for parking pads in addition to driveway and utility connections that we just can't fit in with the street trees every 25 foot. So we've been thinking about this project as an extension of Origins, and we would see continuing having, you know, some on-street guest parking. Most of the homes are set up with a courtyard entry into a garage. And or a straight pull-in garage that allows sufficient driveway space to park additional cars with, assuming there's 2 cars in the garage, then you can get typically 2 cars and more than 2 cars in the driveway. And then with the on-street parking, we just felt like that would be hopefully sufficient to do that.
Okay.
If, you know, there's a huge concern there, we would still like to ask for a deviation. We would agree to provide 3 on-site parking spaces, but just worry about trying to provide a lot of parking on-site at each house when we've got some other ways that we can accommodate.
Okay.
You don't really know at this point, though, how much, I guess, additional parking you're gonna have, other than you're requesting 2 per resident.
Right, we don't, you know, some of that would come in on a project-by-project basis as we come in with the individual development orders, because we haven't fully designed or laid out any of the subdivisions. So I don't know what we would be having in there.
Okay.
And then if I could just clarify on the wetland setback question. As part of the RG Regional General Permit with the Corps and the Ecosystem Management Agreement with DEP, any wetlands, once we go in with a project, any wetlands that we do not impact are required to be placed under a conservation easement. So that would eliminate or prohibit future development at some future point. And that was all that was taken into account that we weren't going to be required to kind of buffer something that was already under a conservation easement.
Okay.
Thank you. I think we're at Stub Streets. We're just looking for a deviation for code for allowing substreets to future projects and undeveloped adjacent lands as the applicant is the sole owner of the DSAP 1 areas. And so they would be planned within the overall layout. Blocks deviation, the LDR, your LDR identifies residential areas at a 1,200 linear foot. And we are proposing residential blocks that may extend up to 2,000 feet. Again, in the recognition of the interior wetland areas, we think that's a doable location, because the grid work will be protected and would be able to fit probably, most certainly within a 2,000 foot. We're challenged probably in a 1,200. Sidewalks, the code requires sidewalks on both sides of residential streets and all new subdivisions. The Water Sound Origins community allows for on-grade paths and multi-use paths in residential areas that substitute for that requirement, and we would like that same ability in this extension. Telephone, a deviation is requested require the applicant to provide access to telephone service or internet service. Stormwater management. Again, this is a reference of the RGP EMA area and stormwater management and treatment requirements, that it's included within that permit, and making that that the requirements of the EMA would be identified and implemented. And then post page 23, those really are the deviations. There's additional design guides for residential design in the village center and town center and village center on the following pages. So if there's additional questions that you may have, be happy to provide a response.
So the rest of these are not necessarily deviations, they're just standards?
They will be the design guideline, the residential and non-residential design guides that will be incorporated within those future developments, yeah.
On the telephone, I don't understand what that is. I mean, you don't want to have to provide service, or?
No, the land development code requires that telephone service be provided, but a lot of people are going to cell phone service and high internet usage. So and most of the telephone, not all telephone, we wanted some flexibility to just provide connectivity and not leave it at telephone only. So as an example, if you don't have a typical telephone service line, but you've got internet through Mediacom or somebody else, and you just use your cell phone, then we've met that requirement by providing internet access if they don't do telephone with a typical CenturyLink or some other provider.
And that's a deviation from what the land development code requires?
The land development code section on that was just specific to providing telephone service.
It was very specific.
Period. So I'm not sure if it's a deviation or maybe on our side it's a clarification.
Clarification, really.
Okay.
It sounds like to me y'all trying to keep the uniformity with the the original water sentence, what y'all trying to do here.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
How big is the original water sound?
The DRI is 2,400 acres, and we've done some trading, so we're probably at 1,300 or 1,400 units, but we had all golf on the south side of 98.
How big is this development?
2,400
So this
acres.
water sound will be an extension of this ultimately, is what's going to happen.
Ultimately, yeah, we started at the edge
Right.
and we're kind of working our
This
way.
is going to be much larger than that.
When did y'all build the original water sound?
We started back in 2007, right before the economy tanked.
Counties, my position as a county, it's changed quite a bit since then. It's going to be very difficult then, get deviations to make it look like that, because we got a whole lot of different problems now. I mean, it seems to me there needs to be work done on this before you go any further. My opinion.
Well, let's,
I mean, because this is not 2000 whenever, it's a whole lot different now.
I think that's part of why we're going through these deviations, and that's why it's important that we understand what they all are.
Right, and I think that from the applicant's perspective, from our perspective, we want
I
to
understand what
maintain the
you're trying to do.
consistency.
I
right?
understand that, but it's gonna be a difficult.
But what's going in between the two of these?
That's also part of the sector plan. It's just not proposed as part of this DSAP. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Correct.
So this would not
Eventually.
control, if
That
we were to
middle.
grant these deviations, that would not control.
We'll have to come back for a future DSAP, right, Kristen?
Right.
And
They're not connected.
right. Well, we're showing future connections through or to between those as part of this, as part of the comments received.
Okay.
That's all your deviations?
Yes, sir.
All right. Anything else y'all want to present right now?
No, sir, we stand ready for additional comments, and I know that there was a school board member, staff member.
We need to, y'all want to address that now? The school thing? Okay.
Michelle Doggett, Doggett, Walton County School Board. I just want to start by saying that St. Joe and Walton County School Board have worked closely together for many, many years, and we've had a really good relationship, and they've always been supportive of education in Walton County. Even by our recent project with them, we have, we're leasing a couple of modular units for now and more to come for an off-campus site from South Walton High School for a STEAM or a Magnet Innovative Center right now off near the Origins area. So thank you, St. Joe, for everything you do to support the education system of Walton County. Wonderful project, a lot going on. It sounds like there's a lot of details that need to be worked out, but from the education or the school board standpoint, we just want to make sure that we're together and work closely, because we did not see any conveyance of property or future plans for a site for schools. And I just wanted to make you all aware, as you all know, our county is definitely growing, as is the school district, and our student numbers have really, really grown. New school built on 98 near this section of where the development's going. Dune Lakes Elementary School, 1,044 student station, and plans to add on to that in the future. But we just want to make sure that we have enough capacity for these students as they come on. So I just want to give you a little bit of information as far as student enrollment. And just to give you an idea of how we have grown, even just since May of this past year, 2019. So I show it, and just for the schools, for Bay School, the new Dune Lakes Elementary School, Emerald Coast Middle School, South Walton High School, and Van R. Butler Elementary School. We have increased our student enrollment by 285 students in 5 months. That's an increase, yes, 285 students in 5 months. That's an increase of 8%. So we're growing so fast, it's hard to, sometimes we feel like keep up with that growth and continue to give that quality of education that our students deserve, and we want to continue to give them. So we just want to make sure that, I know that it has in the DSAP 1 plan that St. Joe did put in here, they're going to work with the Walton County School Board to coordinate location of future needed educational facilities. But we just want to make sure that we're on the forefront of that, and that we do that up front, because I know they have segmented the project out in phases and over a 15-year period. So as they segment it out, as you look at it and you break it up and dissect it, then we could get by and make do with the facilities that we have now by continuing to increase the amount of either portables or modular units or, student classroom additions as we can. But in order to keep up with that, we would just want to make sure that we're involved in the big picture which where, it's over 5,800 dwelling units now, even larger than that, I think up to 24,000 at the end, 15 to 30 years out. So we're just trying to make sure that we're working together to remember the sites that are needed. Even here in Hammock Bay and Freeport, I mean, they were generous enough to convey 30 acres to us, which we're looking at using hopefully soon because Freeport's growing equally as well. So any questions?
So do y'all see the need for, with what they're talking about here? What do you think you're gonna need?
It's really, school sites are based on the population,
Right.
but the information that was given to you, it shows if our student population is growing on average, 2.4%
Right.
each year. So the information that you have gives the capacity right now with modular units in place. When we only look at, which is what we normally do when we figure capacity, you look at what we call bricks and mortar,
Not
which is
modular.
your hard buildings, right? I mean, because if you just always factor in the modular units where you're always going to be at capacity, but that's not really where we ultimately want to keep our students, are in modular units. We want, as many bricks and mortar buildings for them that we can. But we would like to be able to work with St. Joe to look at the land and see where possible future school sites would be, maybe in this phase, to help us even on down the line. We might not need it in the next 5 years, but with the revised capacity that I have, some of our schools, even in 5 years, I mean, we're already at capacity, a couple of them. Yes, sir, we are.
It's not just elementary.
No, sir. No, sir. Right now, South Walton High School, we actually have 1,023 permanent student stations. We have 958 students in there. We're at 94% capacity. And we have a project right now where we're expanding as we can, but the athletics, we're trying to address that area. But now we're looking at coming back and building more student stations, more classrooms, which January of last year, as you all know, we just opened a 10 classroom addition. And it didn't take long to, we filled that up, and now we need more. And with that site, and with so many sites in the south end, we're limited as to where we can build, how we can build, so it's a bit of a challenge. So land is, I know it's at a premium, hard to come by, but we just ask that you please do that for the students, to just keep that in mind.
Anybody else have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go through some of these deviations before we actually have public comment. Or do I have that backwards, Sydney?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
We're good. I do want to clear up, staff is saying that, so the sector plan says general things like you have to have multimodal transportation. You have to have adequate connection, but it doesn't really say, it's kind of up to us to say what that is. And so while what they're proposing may be generally consistent, staff doesn't feel like right now it's totally there to be what we want it to be in terms of transportation. So I just want to, and I know there was maybe a discrepancy there in what was said. In terms of the deviations, wetland protection, I think we've been working under that with the current development, and, to me, it's fine. I mean, I have an issue with the variable buffer width and being consistent with the RPG and EMA. In fact, some of these kinds of flexibilities that I think that they have in here, such as setbacks and wetland protection, may help us down the road in terms of mobility and transportation. So oftentimes that's what we have to think about is, what is really important, what are the trades that we're making, and how can we get a good quality development and at the same time meet the needs of the public. So
So those are good then for the county?
yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any issue with us for the wetland protection. It will make things easier for staff, actually, if we just have it defined the same way it is in the RPG and EMA, and we've been doing that in their other project. And, when you have a lot of conservation in a development like this, like they have, and they have a tremendous amount of conservation lands, that really negates, you know, some of the negative effects of having a variable buffer. Building setbacks, again, this gets into design, urban design. And I know that, you know, sometimes we think, well, if we have bigger setbacks, we'll have less units. Well, this project is capped at a certain amount of units. So however they get those units, they get those units. They have a certain entitlement. And the setbacks are not going to affect the density of the project. So, you know, and sometimes if you have sort of a design that's more urban in nature, where you're mixing uses, it's okay to have less setbacks. You know, if you go to New Orleans, you have 0 setbacks, right? I'm not saying that that's what this is going to be like, but setbacks in our code are suburban in nature, and they don't really lend themselves to mixture of uses. And, you know, that's okay. With all of the environmental lands that they have set aside and the environmental lands that are going to be sort of in between their pods of development, it's just not of concern to me. I would rather they have that flexibility to create the urban design that we might like to see and that will facilitate the transportation system that we'd like to see.
Do you really see that as urban, as the development? Is
I
that
do
another
see
reason
there-
they're trying to do only 2 parking spaces?
I do.
They're
No,
not
I mean, I'm
providing
not. Yeah.
enough.
I'm not talking about parking. I'm talking about setbacks.
I know,
Yeah.
but the setbacks, that's the whole issue. And also, okay, you don't hold them to it, but an individual property owner, all of a sudden you have new land development codes, brand new. They're here. This is what you're saying they have to be. So some person who has their own lot wanting to develop, they have to meet it. But St. Joe, because they've got so many, don't have to?
Not, we're talking about setbacks.
I
We
am
have
too.
we have a
I am
lot of
too.
developments in the county that have different setbacks than what are in our code. Lots. It depends on the design of the
before,
development.
Correct? Aren't
No,
these-
we have PUDs that come in today. It depends on, you know, if you're going into a new development and they have smaller side setbacks, that's what you're buying. You know, there are patio homes, there are 0 lot line homes. I mean, it's just a matter of the design of the development.
Then why do
I just
we
don't want to
have
conflate it with density.
Yeah, I know, but why do we have a land development code that specifies this particular setback, and then every time you have a development, you give them a deviation? Take it out.
I would love to do that. I don't think that's for me to do, but, you know, it is
Is that part of the planning department's
it's
job?
definitely part of urban design, and let's say we had a neighborhood plan, or we had a redevelopment plan, or there may be a call to do that at some point, yeah, because we do have suburban setbacks in our code that are codified, and there are deviations from those regularly. And, you know, it's really not a density issue, and we confuse that a lot, and I just want to be clear that that doesn't affect their density. And from a design perspective and a staff perspective, I'm not concerned with the setbacks. In fact, I think it's probably a good thing for this development.
Is it fair to say that the setbacks are there, it's a county-wide or an area, I mean, it's a standard, but there's also built into the code the ability to grant a deviation to that setback. And I think that's there for this reason, where you have a development that's a large development, trying to do creative and different things, you can allow them to do those things. But they're not affecting the rest of the county or the rest of the area. It's just within that development. I think that's why we have the ability to grant deviations.
And if you're backing up to a wetland, I mean, does it really matter if you have a 15-foot rear setback? I mean, your whole back of your property is a wide open conservation easement.
Yeah.
You know, or if you're, you know, let's say you're in an urban village, like a village type setting, what they're trying to do, and you want to bring a cafe up to the street to meet the sidewalk to create a public space, that's a good thing. And sometimes setbacks eliminate great spaces, public places, because they create this separation.
Yeah, I think the code is necessary to create a standard, but there's also within that code, the ability to grant those deviations and changes for specific reasons.
Landscaping, it's my understanding that this deviation is only on their local streets. And I could be wrong, so we need to get that clarified, but it relates back to the cross-street cross-sections that they have in here, which are only for local streets, so that those are neighborhood streets. So from our perspective, I think we would be more concerned if there was a deviation from, say, a collector or an arterial or some kind of a street that we were trying to provide street trees for aesthetics and shade.
Is she correct on that? Okay.
So, especially if they are planning on-street parking, that makes total sense. Now, whether or not you agree with the on-street parking, that's a different matter. But the two go together for sure. Building foundation, landscaping. This was something that got put in our code recently. I think it's nice. I don't think it precludes you from having outdoor spaces. I think there's ways to design foundation landscaping in cafe settings or outdoor spaces. But this is, again, it does kind of make it where you have to have a space between that building facade and, say, the public realm, which is where the street and sidewalk begin. And, I don't know. Either way on that. Parking requirements. It's just one of those things that, we had discussions about it, and I think that, these are internal private streets. So the only real public concern that I can see is, could be related to emergency vehicle access. If you have a great deal of parking in the street, that becomes a nuisance. But that's something that they can manage with their HOAs potentially. But these are private streets.
So this falls in the same kind of category that if you're in a suburban setting, 4 bedrooms have to have 4 parking spaces. More than 4, you have to add 1 per bedroom. But here, it's urban, so we don't care, but other
I didn't say
places-
that. Yeah, I didn't say that. I just said that, if they have an overflow parking and they're planning for it to be in the street, the public concern, I think, would be emergency vehicles.
Have we had any comments from, like, South Walton Fire District on that?
No, we haven't, and that may be something that we can seek from them in the interim here, because they may not realize that that's in there.
Right.
This really didn't follow a typical TRC pattern. It did, but it didn't have to. So we can ask for them for their opinion on that. And before we get to the next step, if, that
I would think
would-
that'd be a good thing, especially if you're gonna have in-street parking. They need to be aware of that and how they will maneuver around it.
And it may be that they have some design alternative where that on-street parking is pulled out. I don't know, what the plan is. But yes, two spaces per unit probably will result in parking elsewhere.
There's not a mobility plan yet either, right?
There's not a mobility plan. That's a very good point. So we are not reviewing this project on the mobility plan. We're reviewing it on the sector plan policies that are in the comp plan
Will
now.
Not affect parking and parking spaces depending on what your mobility plan is.
Well, it could, if people have other ways to get around, say a golf cart or a micro-mobility or transit, then, but still people have
But if
car-
you
It
go-
just
if
depends on who lives in the house, really.
Question about setbacks and right-of-ways. Okay, if you got a mobility plan that's got all this expansive lanes for traffic of different vehicles, they can have rickshaws if they want them, where you gonna, where you gonna park the cars? Front yard?
This is I think an issue where they maybe think their market is gonna be a 2-car home and, there may be parking in the street.
But you got a bike path and you got a path for a walking path, a bicycle path, or a Gartkoff path, and then you got parking for cars? Then you can have 0 setback?
Well, this is parking for cars at the single-family homes.
Right.
So we're not deviating from our big parking
But
standards.
I'm just wondering, how does all that fit together?
Well, I don't know that, the amount of cars that someone parks at their home depends on their family composition, really and truly.
Right.
And if you look at ITE parking generation standards, it really is 2 spaces per home. So that means that the traffic engineers went out and surveyed millions of houses all over the country, and that's what the number came out to be. So our code goes way above that, you know, in general, and a lot of codes don't. But, you know, two cars is pretty standard for a single-family home, honestly. So if they have a teenager or they have visitors, they're going to be in the street or somewhere else.
Will there be restrictions within this development in the single-family housing for short-term rentals?
Yes, we see that. You know, when we started Origins, we anticipated a long time ago, we thought there might be some short-term rental there. When we, coming out of the recession and the people that are living there, they actually came to us and said they didn't want to see short-term rental. So we recorded a covenant, amending the covenants and restrictions for the community association that limited rentals to a minimum of 6 months. And then nobody could rent for any time frame less than that.
Is that going to be the same thing going forward in this?
We haven't, our thought is that with this being an extension of Origins, we see it as more primary, but we haven't gotten to that level of detail yet that we would record a covenant that limits short-term rental, but we don't see.
Because I can see where if you have short-term rentals, the parking is going to be an issue.
Yes, yeah, and we've experienced.
And I think that, I know it would cause me concern to say you've only got to have 2 spaces, and we get 5 years down the road, you got a bunch of short-term rentals on the street, and ain't no place for nobody to park.
They just can't bring the cars.
Yeah.
They just can't bring the car. See, they, I guess that was what I was trying to say earlier, is they can control that with their HOA, and I would imagine that they'll have some control over that, but,
Well, I think the point that Barbara and Tom may be trying to make is, you know, if we don't have some control over it and they don't control it, then, you know, 10 years down the road, you'll get what you have now, and everybody in South Walton point their fingers back at the back, you know, at the BCC saying, y'all didn't do nothing to address this, you should have known it was coming. And I think that that's part of the problem we have today, is a perception that y'all just let it go. I don't think anybody just let it go. But when you're in a project of this size, and you can't answer the question, are you gonna have short-term rentals? I think that the perception is if you allow short-term rentals, it's gonna happen. And when it happens, parking is gonna be a nightmare.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a question of how and I know we're still going through the deviations, but are we going to vote on these deviations individually?
I think we should.
Is it going to be, because there's things that we as a board are going to agree or disagree on?
Absolutely. And that's why I wanted to go
There's
through.
a lot of things. I mean, this is a lot of stuff that still needs to be, in my opinion, needs to be taught through. A lot of issues that needs to be taught through, some serious issues.
And that's why I wanted to go through them individually. And I think that we should, if we approve the deviations, it should be on an individual basis because there's too much there.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's why we're doing it this way.
and the staff recommendations, those are really important.
Absolutely.
Right, we, I was supposed to say we haven't
Yeah,
even
we
gotten
haven't
to
got there
Kristen.
yet.
Yeah, we really need to worry about the roads. Okay, stub streets. I think the comprehensive plan requires them to make interconnections. It says that very clearly, that this development has to be internally connected. So there's no deviation from the sector plan, the comp plan requirement. They have to, I think what they're saying is we don't want to necessarily show a stub street in a particular project. That.
What we're trying to eliminate is when we get to the edges of the proposed DSAP development and we have stub streets there, that we are allowed to do that because we see it as connecting to future. Or if we're in a particular project of this DSAP and we have a stub street because we're anticipating connecting to some future development within the DSAP, that we be allowed to have the stub street and not necessarily just have stub streets for the sake of that. Some of it, I think, is going to be defined by the wetland characteristics, and we're only going to be able to go so far and not be able to get to a wetland crossing. But our intent is that, you know, a lot of the transportation and road network be integrated and interconnected and not just end up with a bunch of dead ends or stub streets.
I think if we get the transportation map correct here, if we get the mobility map correct, that becomes less of an issue. But if we don't have the defined connections on this map to begin with, it's more of an issue, because one of the critical things that the state looks for in terms of how they make road improvements is what other kinds of networks are sort of off of that state road. So you almost are at the mercy of DOT if you don't have sort of a connected grid or alternative modes to move people around in your community. In other words, we have more of a negotiating position with DOT if we do these things. And it really matters. It matters greatly. So we want to make sure that, you know, we show the connections off of those facilities, and that we're sure, you know, they've kind of got some general arrows connecting into future development here, and we've got some further refinements on what I handed to you. You know, with that being said, I'm still a little confused about the comp plan requires the substreets, and I think what they're saying is, or the code requires the substreets, and in some cases they may not want a stub street, in some cases they will want a stub street based on what the future development is that right? So they don't want to be stuck with the requirement every time, which I'll say, okay, if we get this right. We get the mobility plan right, because the point of the stub street is to create that connection to let's say you have another developer coming in beside you, we'll require them to put a stub in, and then when that other developer comes in, we require them to meet up with that. And we're getting stronger with that than we have been. So that creates this sort of off network way for people to get around that's not on your major collectors and arterials, which is very important.
And I'm not sure I understood your point about DOT and what they would work with you on.
Well, we got West Bay Parkway coming in, for instance.
Right.
So we may want an alternative design to West Bay Parkway than the typical DOT road. We may want an alternative design to what they're doing on 98. We may want like multi-use paths on both sides or a transit lane. The DOT defines roads as like urban, suburban, and they have all these standards that are associated with those. And the way they get to those definitions is really based on sort of what's external to that state facility. So if we don't make those connections, then they're going to say to us, look, we're carrying all the traffic, we're doing the road this way, bottom line. And we lose our position. And it's really complicated, but that's how it is. So we care about West Bay Parkway, and we care about what's happening on 98 with this new design that's coming with the mobility plan. We want to make sure that those facilities are what the county wants.
Okay.
The block deviation, I think, is fine. I would feel a little bit better if it said that instead of in that fourth bullet where it says blocks may be single, I'm sorry, where it says, somewhere it said, oh yeah, individual blocks, it's the third bullet, individual blocks may be broken up by natural resources, trails, cart paths, or conservation open space. The reason for the block length requirement in the code is for pedestrian mobility. So it allows you to move around without traveling a long distance by foot or bike. And if you don't, our current code says that we'll allow you to deviate from the block length, but the planning director has the ability to require that cross connection, like a little trail through or something through that block, so that the pedestrians and cyclists can get where they want to be without going on long distance. So that's, you know, I think if we could still maintain that connection through there, the block length wouldn't be as important, which we have the ability to do in the code now. And the sidewalks, I think, is consistent. They do have in here, they have the typical street sections for their residential streets that show sidewalks and multi-use path alternatives. So I feel confident that there will be a bike or pedestrian facility on all of their local streets. And if you look at there's a table that we added on page 21, which is right before these deviations, that talks about what kinds of facilities we would need for multimodal development. Because again, the sector plan requires them to do multimodal, not the mobility plan, the sector plan that's in place now. So this is where we get the right-of-way widths that we're recommending. If you look at, this is kind of what we think we need to achieve the multimodal capabilities that the county is looking forward to. And, you know, let's say we don't have transit, or we don't have whatever, this is not set in stone. I mean, there can be changes made at some point, but one thing I know for sure is that if we put a bunch of development in those right-of-ways,
They ain't moving.
that's it. It would get very expensive to retrofit. So if we can identify the major right-of-ways and get the right, the major road network and get the right-of-ways on there, I think it'll be critical for us moving forward in the future.
Telephones is next.
Oh, telephones, yeah, I mean, I think it's just a clarification, like Bridget said. I mean, our code does say telephone, but, you know, a lot of people have, you know, the internet, the cable provides the phone now. I mean, that's okay, right? Have to be like yeah. And the stormwater, again, that is also consistent with the RPG and EMA, and it's consistent with the county's stormwater requirements, so it's not really that they're not doing our level of service standards that we have in place for stormwater. And so that's okay. We just wanted to, I asked them to put all these in here because I wanted staff to know, okay, what part of the code do they have to follow? What part of the code do they not have to follow? So we don't get it messed up when we do our minors. Yeah.
Mr.
Why don't we
Chairman?
take about 10 minutes and we'll come back and go through staff recommendations.
All right, well, it was clear as mud, wasn't it?
I'm gonna give you this.
Okay.
Interesting stuff.
Pour my brain down.
I'll tell you what, I don't have much to begin with, so I'm handicapped.
Let's buy some water. Some of this could have been. Yeah, yeah, I'm in, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Malcolm, you on?
Yes, please.
All right. Well, I'm looking at now, your screen's.
The courthouse down at the annex.
North of Power. Somewhere. And then one of them turn around.
The aluminum foil, she's just she's been. You arrested her.
You know what? Lee?
Had your money, I put it in the dirt right now.
Karen, you ready?
Probably never happened.
No, I did.
You got my late message? I didn't send her an email till today, tell her I'd be here, so. I was complaining on being here the whole time, just forgot to send it.
Are we on, Karen? We'll go ahead and call the meeting back to order. And Kristen, if you would tell us what staff's recommendations are.
Okay,
And that'll be very helpful.
Is that in the staff report?
yes. I think it's it's towards the end, page 20. Sorry, it's so wordy, but I was just discussing with the applicant, and I think, I think they're gonna look at some stuff, and, I mean, what's important for us, and I'll show you on this map, and you have the map too, is that this future development, right? Future development here, you get some future development here. Big development. So what's important for us is that we have this parallel 98 access and edge right away. They know they're gonna make that connection, but we would like to show them in East Avenue why that's important is because we have development on the anchor end. So the connection into the anchor will be made now. We need to say, well, what are we connecting there now.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to figure out how we're gonna address that. And, you know, the county has a potential connector down here, shown on your map. And actually, that's a good idea. I know everybody doesn't like the idea of going through the forest, but it's a good idea for transportation and mobility. It would provide this sort of alternate here, because you have almost 8 or 9 mile stretch, I can't remember what it is, in between those pop-off points from 38. For manufacturing, mobility is important for often those transportation. So that connects into this development. So that's kind of what we're asking them to provide now. You know, let's understand what these driveways are gonna be, so that when we get we know that that's what we need for the future. If, you know, this is 50 foot, that's not enough for the future. That's what residential street.
But what you're asking for is something definite on what they're planning on running between there.
Yes, we're asking for a definite identification of what these facilities will be and how they connect. And, you know, in my dreams, it's 110 across there.
Well, there's nothing there. This is the time to
Take
do that.
84. Yeah,
This is the time to put that in place.
it is. I mean, if you don't do it now, then it's,
Not gonna be done.
well, it's very expensive, very expensive.
Now, is that actually in your staff report here somewhere? Because I don't see it.
It is, it's in the paragraph that we talk about Road A to be depicted as a major collector or minor arterial. So that has that right, the major collector and minor arterial are defined in the DSAP at a certain right-of-way, so that would get us to that right-of-way. Then we also talk about the future road connection between the two DSAP development areas, and we would like to see that identified as a major collector or minor arterial, again, establishing adequate right-of-way in the connection. Now, the other recommendations that we have here, the one related to the utilities, this is something that I think regional is going to have to produce if we're going to be consistent with the comp plan. Because the comp plan doesn't say, it says that there has to be a financial analysis. So it says that you have to look at this 15-year build out, and then you have to provide a financial analysis of impacts to the water and sewer system. So it's not really a capacity analysis per se. It's a, you know, yeah, it is a capacity analysis. Like we have capacity for 5 years. Okay, but in 10 years, we would need additional capacity. It's going to cost X amount of money, and this is how you're going to pay for it. That's what the comp plan says. And I think they can do that. They have a 5-year schedule. Regional's actually pretty good about that. And they, you know, I'm not worried about it, but we need to check that box. And the school board, if I heard Michelle correctly, they believe that a site is needed in this DSAP. So this DSAP is a 15-year build out. It's a certain number of units, almost 6,000. So the school board's analysis shows that that's going to trigger the need for an additional site. It needs to be in this DSAP, not the next DSAP. I think that's really it.
How do you get to what type of site's needed? I'm just curious for a school.
They have a methodology. Yeah, there's methodology for
Does
doing
standard
that.
methodology?
Mhm.
Okay.
I'm sorry, FDOE has an acreage capacity for school type.
Okay.
That's one of the problems is it's huge.
Yeah, and we would love to get a copy of that capacity analysis. Our student FTE analysis didn't show a demand. Certainly you're growing. We would love to take a look at that and talk with staff about what that may be. And what that scheduling may be over a 15-3 phase, 15-year phase development.
Okay. Something I didn't ask about earlier just came to my mind. Public safety. Is there something set aside in here? Because
They did say that there's 5 acres set aside in the DSAP for fire and,
sheriff.
yeah.
Okay.
something that we did get
Wasn't that
information.
just for the fire? I don't think it said anything about the sheriff.
Yes, the fire department is the one that came forward, and they did meet with the sheriff and
Oh,
with the
did
fire
they?
department.
Okay.
And the fire department came forward and said, yes, we need this, and they gave them some location criteria.
They did for fire, but I wasn't sure they did for the sheriff.
Didn't identify a need, then that's basically what the comp plan says. If you identify a need, then
I see.
they have to provide it. The fire department did do that.
Is that all staff recommendations? Okay,
Applicant talk about what they're planning on doing next, I think would be good, yeah.
that'd be a good idea.
We appreciate, we had some conversation during your break with staff, and the recommendations that had been made in the staff report required some additional assessment by the applicant and the owner prior to scheduling before the board, okay? And so along those lines, the mobility discussion we discussed, we received the Walton County School student station discussion. There's also this discussion about regional utilities that we had reached out in the past and hadn't received the information needed to complete that type of assessment, but it sounds like maybe with regional utilities, we'll be able to answer that as well. And then there was another comment, number 3 on the bottom of page 21, about the environmental review comments that had been provided under technical review. We had reached out to that reviewer as well. We had supplemented our information previously, but he had not completed a review of that information. So we are hopeful that we had responded to all of his questions. But we will stand ready to work with staff to answer these as we go forward. Again, we think that the proposed deviations are consistent with a development pattern that has been established, that's going to connect to this DSAP acreage, to these future development, especially in the early phases. And we would appreciate your support on them. We would certainly agree to the conditionalized approval that staff has shown to work with them prior to the scheduling before the board.
Okay. Okay, what we're going to do is go ahead and open up public comments. Is there anybody who would like to comment on this that has not yet? Okay, we'll close public comment. Commissioners, thoughts, questions, Mr. Barker? Looks like you might have some.
So other than what I said earlier about this, are we still going to vote on them individually, or are we just going to vote on staff recommendations?
Are we voting on deviations right now?
We can do whatever we decide to do. We haven't made that decision, so right now it's just discussion. I mean, if you want to make a motion, we can.
I'm not ready for a motion.
Okay. That's what we need to talk about it and see where everybody's at, so.
Just so I'm clear, Kristen, you got 2 areas that you're concerned with, the connectors and the school board property. Is that correct? Or am I missing one?
Right-of-way width, demonstrating connectivity, and obviously the school board issue, yes.
But it's
And
only on the
we need to get an
connector roads that
analysis
you're worried
from.
about the right-of-way width?
Yeah, the local streets were fine with 50 feet, yes. The collectors and arterials,
And
we
you
need
like
to
a
have.
minimum size on that, I guess?
And we have that defined in there in the table. We went through the analysis. We need 82 on the minor collectors and 110 on the
That's in your
major collector,
recommendation.
minor arterial.
This is minimum.
You need to know where those are on the map.
Yeah.
Minimum
minimum
Locations, you need locations too.
locations.
Would they be subject to
Picture on the map.
change according to the mobility plan?
Well, if when the proposed mobility plan right now only shows really West Bay Parkway and Watersound Parkway. So it's not really, whatever they do internal in their development. But if they build the Watersound Parkway, which is one that we're asking for, the good 110 foot, according to the mobility plan, then they'll receive credit in their development. The way mobility fees work is the improvement has to be shown in the mobility plan in order for the developer to get the credit against the fee. So in some ways, these two things are interrelated.
Basically, we could resolve your problems just accepting your recommendations on the transportation mobility stuff.
What about school board? Is that in here? On your-
It's in my recommendations, yeah, because there's conflicting analyses, basically, is what's happened. They have one analysis and the school board has another. And I think they need some time to digest the school board's analyses.
I think we can condition something on that for the BCC. You know, conditioned on them reaching some type of agreement or supporting the school board.
Mr. Chair, the staff report already has under item 2 on page 21, provide a letter from Walton County School Board indicating whether or not any school sites are required.
Right.
And so that will require a conversation between staff and the applicant and the owner. That is a condition prior to moving forward to BOCC.
Right.
So we'll talk about the different.
So what's in there will cover this?
That's it. By the condition, we're going to need a letter from the school district.
School board.
Stating that we will.
Whether or not school sites are needed.
Okay.
I think Barbara had an issue with parking though.
Right, but are we finished with the staff
And Commissioners,
recommendations?
and I'm sorry to jump in, but I wanted to point out to the board, I mean, we've discussed a lot of different items, and I know that staff has presented their recommendations, and I believe the applicant's going to have to do a lot of work before this ultimately comes to the BCC. So a possibility for this board is to consider continuing the item and then bringing back any changes to you as well. I just want to make sure that you understood that that was an option.
That might be a good idea.
Absolutely support that.
Yeah, I do have.
100%. Yeah, I'll go with that.
Some of the other deviations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead and say what those are?
Well, the main one has to do with the parking. I really do feel that unless we have an agreement that they're not going to do short-term rentals, that two, if you do short-term rentals, 2 is not enough. I've been in these communities. I've tried to park when I go to see someone, and I end up walking on the sand paths from my car to get to the house, and people are parked everywhere. They get a warning, but they ignore them. So unless you say you guarantee you're not going to have short-term rentals, I won't agree to 2 parking places for a house.
I think we've had enough, and the applicant probably has enough to work on. And I would say if we continue it, when we come back, hopefully we'll have something more concrete as far as agreements and where we stand, right, Kristen, on all these things. Mm-hmm.
Provided the watercolor fire station site. We're pretty, try and work as close as we can with the sheriff's department. But if there's some hesitancy here, I don't want to sit here and say, no, we have to do this today.
I think it would be probably
I think if there's some
a good
consideration-
recommendation would be to continue it maybe till next month and give you time to, I guess more narrowly, come to an agreement on what these deviations and all this other stuff. There's a lot of information, and I'm afraid that if we try to move forward tonight, then it may not be what we want it to be.
And I think from our perspective, if you could provide some, I understand the parking and the parking issue fully, but if there are other concerns with either the proposed deviations, that, we get a better handle on that, then that, so that when we do come back, we have hopefully a pretty crisp meeting.
Mr. Barker, what do
And
you
we
got?
can all just move forward.
What do you want clarification on?
I'm good.
I mean, I pretty much go along with Kristen, but now the parking issue does need to be tightened up. I mean,
Is there any other questions that anybody has that maybe we didn't talk about enough? I mean, does anybody want to make a motion to continue? Or do you think we should?
I would make a motion to continue it until such time that we bring back a little bit more.
yeah, I would like to say,
concise.
I wish we'd get. a
Sorry to jump in,
mobility
we're gonna
plan.
have to continue it to a date certain, just
Yeah.
for advertising purposes.
Right. I would say till next meeting.
Okay.
Should be enough time.
Will that give them enough time? Or do we want to kick it to March and give them a lot of time so that?
I don't think they won't.
I don't think that they'll need that much time, to be honest with you. I think the issues are narrow enough they can address them.
Will there be a mobility plan at this time?
They have their own in here. I mean, they
the
can
concrete.
come,
Okay.
come back and revise. I mean, the county's overall mobility plan is scheduled for July.
Probably don't want to wait that long.
No, but we do have, we are pro mobility. We built a multi-use path down Marsound Parkway at our expense, at our initiative. We've got plenty of trails and interconnection. We've got a trail now that connects from 30A down Marsound Parkway all the way over to the Conservation Park in Panama City Beach. It's one of the things that we've done a lot of trails, and that seems to be one of the most popular amenities. I know, golf cart use is becoming more popular in some areas, and the scooters and the electric bikes and that. A lot of that is congestion along 30A that we just haven't seen at the existing Origins community. People ride their bikes through the neighborhood. We're getting some momentum on the commercial at the intersection of 98 and Marsound Parkway. So we're providing places for people to go north of 98 that are not, they won't have to necessarily go too far afield to get the services and get the activity and the recreation that they think they're, looking for.
Okay. Well, we have a motion and a second to continue to the February meeting.
Second.
We already have a
We
second.
got a motion,
A motion and a second.
Can't third a motion.
You can vote on it, though. if you
Vote
want
on
to.
it.
Yeah,
All right, now I didn't hear, did you second it?
yeah,
Okay.
he did. Mr. Roberts seconded it. And I would say that during that time, I think the biggest issues, as you've heard Ms. Barber got a problem with the parking, is try to address that and narrow that down and come to an agreement on the mobility stuff. I think that you already are there. It's just a matter of making sure that this board feels comfortable enough to make a recommendation to the BCC. Okay? We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate your time and
Thank you.
attention on this.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item on our agenda is the New Life Church of God. This is a major development. It's been reviewed by Bob Baronti. And I'll ask Bob to briefly introduce it for us.
Good evening. My name's Bob Baronti. This is a request, as Max said, for a major development order. It is application submitted by Innerlight Engineering Incorporated on behalf of New Life Church of God Incorporated, requesting the approval to construct a 30,482 square foot church with coffee shop and associated parking on 5.05 plus or minus acres, with a future land use of mixed use and zoning of small neighborhood. The project is located at 238 Mall Drive, Santa Rosa Beach, and is identified by the parcel number in your staff report. There was one outstanding comment from Dewberry when this went to press, but it has been resolved, so there are no outstanding comments. And Mr. Smith is here to make any quick comments you may have. And do you have any questions for me?
Do you have any questions for staff?
Mr. Chair, would you please enter the staff report in the record?
Accepted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Commission. I'm David Smith with Innerlight Engineering, and I'm representing the New Life Church of God. And as Bob presented, the property's 5.05 acres, and it's located along the west side of Mole Drive. There's currently one single-family residence on the property. The property's unique. It has a small connection that goes out to Mole Drive, and then it opens up as you get back to the rear of the property. And I'll point over here. Church is located basically central to the large portion of the property. Enter in on the drive that connects to Mole Drive. We basically have a drive aisle with parking facilities that go around. There's a basketball area up here on the north side of the building, and then on the west side of the property. So that's a general overview of the development, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Commissioners, any questions for the applicant? I think they're questioned out right now. You got lucky.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. We're going to open it up to public comments. Is there anybody who wishes to speak on this item? All right, we'll close public comments, Commissioners.
Motion to approve. Second.
Motion is second. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. That brings us to the last item on tonight's agenda, the Mack Bayou Residences PUD. This is a request to approve by final order and PUD Overlay Ordinance. It's a major development that's been reviewed by Renee Bradley. It's submitted by Innerlight Engineering on behalf of Crest Residential, requesting the approval of a PUD overlay and technical PUD to construct a residential community consisting of 252 multifamily apartments, 24 townhomes, 12 single-family homes with approximately 15,000 square feet of amenities to include a bike path, public park, and some future commercial development on approximately 37.63 acres. It has a future land use of mixed use, residential, and zoning of small neighborhood infill. Project's located approximately 7/10 of a mile north of the intersection of 98 and Mack Bayou Road, on the right side of Mack Bayou Road, and is identified by the parcel numbers in your package. Applicant is here and prepared to present this case. We'd like to request a staff report be entered.
It's accepted.
Back. And again, for the record, I'm David Smith with Innerlight Engineering.
I thought we just got rid of you, David.
I'm still here. But I'm representing Crest Residential. I'm also here with David O'Brien and Bentley Nelson.
Okay.
And they were Crest Residential. They're out of Birmingham, Alabama. The property is located at the southeast corner of Mack Bayou and East Mack Bayou. And it's unique property in the fact that the property, a portion of the property is on the north side, majority of the property is on the south side. The property does extend all the way to Mack Bayou. This portion is currently vacant. There's a the zoning, there's two zoning classifications, a small neighborhood, which the part in red here is small neighborhood. The smaller portion here is the proposed development is, it's a mixed-use development, Mack Bayou Residences. It's 252 apartments, 24 townhomes, it's 12 single-family cottages, it's 2,325 square foot leasing center, and then we have 2.52 acres of future commercial, which we're calling Phase 2. The main thing I want to discuss on this, we've done everything to serve the we have well across this location. Our goal is possible, as well as preserve the we're not touching that. We have a walkway that does go up to the pond area where residents can go up and as I mentioned, the 252 apartments, they're located garages on the first level, and there's 2 units on the top. The leasing center is here, 2,325 square feet, and then the future commercial location is here. We're not sure if I'll have development plans, so once we do have a development plan, I'll come back through the process. That's our phase 2 portion of the development. I would like to discuss the amenities. We have significant amenities. We have 2 pool facilities. One pool on the north that will serve the temple. Another pool is located in this area here that will serve the southern portion of the development. With the fitness center, on this larger plan, this is Mack Bayou, this is Mack Bayou down over here. The fitness center we have located in this location. We also have a clubhouse facility. We have a large dog park that's over here where the residents can walk their dog. We have a car wash located. One of the things that was important to the developers and us as a design team is we've had 2 community meetings. We wanted to reach out, meet the neighbors, and the first meeting was on July the 18th of 2019. The second meeting was on December the 4th of 2019, and we received a lot of good feedback. And some of the concerns we received is for residents who live north, walking down East Mack Bayou, there's no sidewalks. So it was a safety concern, and especially like with young children or anyone riding a bike. Bayou Drive. So something that we're proud of is we're proposing, I'll put this over this way, we're proposing an 8-foot bike path. That bike path will run here on the west side of East Mack Bayou Drive, and it comes down a curve and will cross East Mack Bayou here. We'll have a hump where it crosses East Mack Bayou. The bike path will then continue, come down, and then it'll go through the west side of our development. So it'll come all the way down. The bike path will then come down in front of our leasing center, cross Mack Bayou to the existing bike path that's on the west side of Mack Bayou. That's something we're proud of. It's a bike path that'll obviously benefit the entire neighborhood, and it's something that was needed from a safety perspective as well. The second thing that we're proposing that's open to the public is a park. And the park is located here in the corner of East Mack Bayou. The park will be landscaping, there'll be benches, and there's small playground equipment. And I have a rendering. Okay, I may have to step a little closer to you all. That's what the park will look like. Here, playground equipment here. Benches, lawn. There's also a playground equipment lawn, and there's a fence that we have that'll have a gate, so children can't freely go out onto the road so that nobody comes overplay.
Okay.
In summary, because I know you all had a long evening, in summary, I know there's a couple comments that are in the staff report that I would like to briefly touch on. With the first comment was by Public Works. We are requesting a deviation for our gates. We do have 3 proposed connections. Mack Bayou Road, one here. There's 2 connections down to East Mack Bayou, one here for the townhomes, and one on the south side that goes to the large portion of the property off Mack Bayou. The deviation, we're requesting a deviation for the gate. We worked closely with planning staff at the beginning of this development. And the feedback we received along East Mack Bayou was to try to place our buildings as close to East Mack Bayou as possible so that you didn't have large parking lots that were located in cars along East Mack Bayou, that the buildings were actually closer, architecturally and aesthetically pleasing, as opposed to looking at cars and a parking lot. So we did that for townhomes. We've also placed these buildings closer. And the challenge we have in doing that is this gate here. We are requesting that you have 60-foot separation from the right-of-way line to the gate, and currently the Land Development Code requires a 100-foot separation, so then you can stack 5 cars. So we're requesting 60 feet so you can stack 3 cars at that gate location. And I did want to point out this particular gate is it doesn't have a box for visitors. It has a fob where visitors will all come down here and listen, which is the main entrance. And there's more. This is the main entrance. So I did want to touch on the Public Works comment. The second comment that's in the staff report I would like to briefly discuss was regarding the bike path. And there was a preference to extend the bike path along East Mack Bayou all the way to Mack Bayou as opposed to bringing it through the development. Well, there's some challenges in this area for the properties that we don't own, where there's fencing, there's a lift station that's in that area, there's power poles. So our preference is to take the bike path through our development along the western portion of the property. It'll be open to the public. We've coordinated with Public Works. There'll be an easement on the path. And that way, then we're not interacting where we don't own property or removing private fencing, things like that that are in that area that are problematic with taking the path down that location. And I did want to mention one other thing. We are proposing a turn lane on Mack Bayou.
Okay.
So we did have traffic analysis performed. The turn lane is not warranted, but it's something we want to do. So when residents are coming home, that they'll be able to get over the right turn lane and traffic continue to flow in the evening with all the other residents that are up further north.
There'll be a lot of people who appreciate that.
That's something that we wanted to do as well. So that's a general overview of the development. So we would be more than happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of the applicant?
I do. I noticed that there was a variance requested for height or some sort of towers you're going to be putting on the structures where there will be infill put in because of low grade. And you said I know you may not know the exact number. You said it wouldn't be very many. Do you have an estimate how many structures that might affect?
Well, we're requesting the deviation for height on the entire development. There's portions of the property that are located within the flood zone, and then there's portions of the property that are not located within the flood zone, but the property is very low. And so we are having to bring in fill. And for the parts that are in the flood zone, we wanted to match the portions of the development that are outside of the flood zones, as well as in our meetings with the residents. There are stormwater flooding issues that are in this area, and I know they've contacted the county on some of the issues with culvert crossings. And we're bringing in the additional fill. We're meeting a 100-year storm event, so we are not contributing anything to any downstream flooding or anything that's currently happening. So for us to meet the additional stormwater requirements, it requires fill. We have low property, high groundwater, and flood zone. So we're requesting it so everything's uniform across the entire development plan.
But that meant then that these towers on your buildings were taller than the building height limit, correct?
That's correct, but I think there's some architectural aesthetics that are allowed that aren't part of the building height requirement. We're just,
I thought that was true, so I wasn't quite sure.
we're not
It
requesting a
wasn't that-
deviation for the height, we're requesting a deviation where the height starts from, where the fill is. The height was,
Well, yeah, because then it makes it taller than the rest of the buildings.
right, so we're just requesting the deviation where it starts from the, after we fill.
Planning department doesn't have a problem. You're working on it? You can work with that. Why are you asking to reduce the number of sidewalks?
That's internally within our development. We have a pedestrian plan where we have our the sidewalks are internal where they interact where the amenities are, and they provide access to all the units, and then they cross the road, and then that's where they usually go fitness center, clubhouse, amenity. There's a sidewalk that goes all the way out to the leasing center, but we have it on one side of the road.
Right.
So we plan strategically for the sidewalk to provide access for all the units and residents to the strategic amenities, anywhere else they may want to walk throughout the community.
So what's the reduction that
The land development code is typically sidewalks on both sides of the road,
okay.
and we have our own sidewalk pedestrian plan that we would like to adhere to.
and the planning department is willing to work with that? You have gates for vehicles. Is there a gate for that bike path that comes into the community?
We'll have fencing and landscaping that will keep the bike paths separate from the development, so members of the public aren't coming in
Okay,
to the
they don't
development.
actually come in, it's along the edge?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Correct. It's totally separate.
On the property, but separate from the development itself.
Okay.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
That's all the questions I have.
Anybody else? You read good, Barbara.
What?
You read good.
Let me
All
tell
right.
you, it took a lot of time.
I know it does. All right, we'll
Thank you.
just be ready in case.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll open up public comments. Is there anybody who wishes to address this item? You don't have to. You have to come up to the podium, though. And where you were sworn in?
Were you sworn in earlier, ma'am?
No,
That's
okay.
okay, just raise your hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll provide to this board will be the truth?
Okay.
So my name is Tammy Miles, M-I-L-E-S, first name T-A-M-I, and I'm the administrator of Brookdale Dustin, which is the assisted living right across the street. And one of my concerns was where your main entrance, it's hard for me to see back there, and the second one was the affordability of the apartments and the townhomes. Because we find that we have staff that can't work because they have to come from Defuniak, Freeport, Crestview. So I'm just wondering what the price point is.
Okay.
Working on our price points as we're going through the process. So there'll be price points that are comparable for other apartment units with, in this area, but we don't have an exact price point yet at this time.
Okay. And what was the other question? I didn't catch the first.
The driveway?
Oh. Did you get that? Did you see where? Yeah, you can look. The gate will be interior, though, back off the roadway. You bet. Thank you. Is there anybody else? Seeing none, we'll close public comments. Commissioners? We have a motion? Do we have a second? We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right,
And we will stand adjourned.
all right. Almost famous.
Slow down, John, you get out of here in time.
It was just exhausting.
It was, a little monotonous there for a while. Hopefully when they come back though, we can knock some of that stuff out of
Hopefully
faster.
they come back.
They won't see us. It'll all be built out.